Private companies capture and hold the vast majority of data, using it to drive smarter and faster business decisions. But what they may not realize is the same data they are using for one purpose may actually be able to serve a myriad of others if donated. For this panel, we'll take a look at corporate social responsibility initiatives, varied approaches, and lessons learned on how they do data for good. So please welcome my panel.
Morning.
Hey, everyone.
And I'll introduce them.
Sit down.
So John Paul Farmer is the Director of Technology and Civic Innovation for Microsoft. Among his many projects, he has helped the United Nations improve how it uses technology and innovation in peacekeeping. He has also served as the Senior Advisor for Innovation at the White House under President Barack Obama. Lead data scientist for UPS's Advanced Technology Group, Mallory Freeman. Her TED Talk on data philanthropy has over 1 million views. Pretty impressive. And Jake Porway, founder and executive director for DataKind, a nonprofit that harnesses the power of data science in the service of humanity. So thank you all for being here. We really have the experts here today.
Oh, thanks.
On a very exciting topic, I think, something I'm personally very passionate about, so excited to talk about it with you. So actually a question for all of you. You know, you have different vantage points in your professional lives, and so what is data for good? What does it mean to you? I don't know if we want to start with you, John?
Sure, absolutely. So it's great to be here. Hi, everybody. At the end of the day, when we talk about data for good, that's kind of the point, right? It's what can we do with data? That's why we're all talking about it. That's why big data has become such a conversation topic in the last 5 to 10 years, because everyone's trying to figure out what can we do. And a lot of those conversations have focused on specific business cases, but there are a lot of pro-social cases. So it's what can nonprofits do when they have access to the right data, the right tools, the right expertise. But it's also what can we, as a company like Microsoft, how can we think about the data that we have access to or the platforms upon which others are storing or using data? How can we think about making sure that those do have those business use cases, but also have those pro-social use cases? And I think the example I want to give, which is not data related, really, is Airbnb. So Airbnb, as we all know, is a great place to book a room when the hotels are sold out, or if you want to go on vacation somewhere, you go get an Airbnb. And those are great personal use cases. But after Hurricane Sandy hit New York 6 years ago, Airbnb quickly realized there's actually a pro-social use case in the wake of a disaster. And so they changed a little bit of code, and quickly they could actually allow people to share their homes for free and not charge anything, which was not possible before that moment. And since then, in dozens of use cases around the world, Airbnb has used their platform, which is a business, for good when the right moment needs it.
Right. And I think in light of recent events, we're seeing a lot of storms and ways that data can be used for resilience and help cities and people is really important. I know a lot of people, I think, in the corporate world, I'm here at Bloomberg, think about philanthropy mainly as funding and program delivery, maybe volunteerism, corporate volunteers, but that's a very interesting perspective. I don't know if Mallory, you want to give your thoughts?
Sure. And so the question was, what is data for good? To me, and for me, it's really something I'm passionate about. I was lucky to spend my PhD studying how we can make the UN World Food Programme's humanitarian supply chain run better. And since then, I've joined the private sector. And on the private sector side, I've seen there's really an increased movement in something called data philanthropy. And it's not just about donating data, but also donating people that can work with data, and as well as technology, so you can actually capture more sources of data or have an impact with the technology that companies have as resources. So I'm happy to work at UPS, who's committed to responsible CSR, and really excited to see my fellow panelists and what the rest of the community is doing in the data for good space.
I think that's a really important point too, because just in the nonprofits that we at Bloomberg work with, they really run the gamut in their, I don't want to say level of sophistication maybe, in using data and data science, and to be able to provide that expertise is sometimes just a huge lift in helping them think about service delivery and how they can make their operations more efficient. But I think for some nonprofits, they're so focused on their program delivery and not necessarily taking a step back and thinking about that data piece and hiring maybe an expensive data scientist. So that's
it's
really
an
wonderful.
investment in a journey that takes time. So.
Absolutely. Jake?
Well, I have to say, hey everyone. I thought John and Mallory put it really well, so I'll just add maybe my own little spin on it. You're always laughing that we talk about doing data for good. Like both terms are really ill-defined. And so I think that the one thing I'd say on the data side I think is interesting is, as many people in this room know, a lot of the big changes are not around just data as kind of raw resource, but algorithms and predictive analytics and all the things that we can do with it. And that's actually fairly new in the social sector. Data has traditionally been for reporting what you've done or measuring your impact for your funders, but the idea that data could be used in operations, the same way that UPS had articles about routing their trucks more effectively, could be used to route vaccines more effectively, is a fairly new idea. So I think one thing we're always pushing on is the real kind of divide that's happened in the way that new technologies and computing technologies and machine learning can be used, really. And that's really what that data is symbolizing for a lot of the things that we do. Netflix didn't become what it is because they do better measurement, right? They have better algorithms. So that's one thing. And then for the good side, it's so interesting. I think what's exciting about this day and age is, data is not just this kind of business opportunity, but we're digitizing our globe, right? We're becoming a kind of digital nervous system. And so I almost wish we didn't say data for good as much as we just said like data for humanity, because as much as it's a business benefit, it's also this opportunity to be a resource to learn about our communities, to put our biggest values first, really tackle root causes. And so to me, I think that's what it comes back to, is like emphasizing our human values and whatever we all can do together to get there.
Great. And so I'm wondering, there are a lot of corporate people here in the room and companies who I think want to get more involved in data for good. So maybe, John, you can share with Microsoft, what are sort of the first steps one should take in thinking about this or being strategic about data philanthropy? You've worked on a lot of projects in this space. What are some sort of best practices in getting
Absolutely.
started?
So first and foremost, it's that old proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so finding the right partners internally and externally is the number one step. Because I promise you, in whatever organization you're currently in, there are people there who care about the issue that you want to work on. People have been thinking about it probably longer than you have. So go find them first. And once you have those internal allies, then think about which kinds of external organizations could really complement your own abilities. And so a couple of ways that we've been doing that at Microsoft. One, through some really straight philanthropy, we created AI for Earth last year to focus on how we're using artificial intelligence and big data to focus on sustainability in the environment. A couple of examples there, just so you understand what I'm talking about. We're working with the Audubon Society to use image classification to address biodiversity and maintain biodiversity in places that are especially acutely impacted by climate change. We're also working with a university to use deep reinforcement learning to improve, much as Jake was talking about, routing trucks and routing vaccines, to improve the patrolling that anti-poaching units do on wildlife reserves. So those are a couple of examples of things we started last year. That's tens of millions of dollars that we're giving toward these really important causes that are also showing people how our technologies, the Azure cloud and its abilities, can really allow everybody, not just our businesses, but including nonprofits, including governments, anyone who's trying to focus on solving a hard problem, showing how they can use these tools to do it. And most recently, we launched AI for accessibility. So similarly focused on disability to make sure that people are enabled to do the things they need to do to live the life they want to live. Just announced $25 million going toward that. So those are examples of clearly we are providing tools, we're providing funding to external parties to solve these problems. But we're also doing some work on our own. Every year we have a week internally where we have hackathons focused on using our tools, our data for good, taking our employees, giving them time, giving them focus, putting them on teams together so that they can feel really proud, not just on the day-to-day work they do in terms of sales or product, whatever it might be, but a specific, discrete project for good.
Great. Mallory, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I think just echoing comments that were just made. So what are you as a business really good at? What's your core expertise? Try to match that up with where you already have existing partnerships, because it does take longer-term partnerships to make an impact. And so, yeah, on the example of UPS, logistics is our core expertise. And in that domain, when it comes to donating data, one thing that we are able to donate and that we have helped out for pandemic response is donating information about our air network and about the overall air network. What that can mean is when there's disruptions in the network, you're able to plan better for getting vaccines or other health supplies where they need to go. Again, on the skills-based volunteering side, when it comes to donating time for people that are available to take data, clean it up, and move it into the algorithms that can lead to eventually insights, it takes the ability to partner your data scientists with problems of interest for the organization. And that's something that we're continuing to do better with. There's organizations like DataKind, which Jake works with, that helps match up people that want to help with projects that need help. So there's ways out there that can facilitate.
And I just want to add on to that because I think that point about what are you good at? So think about logistics as UPS. At LinkedIn, which is a part of Microsoft now, in dozens of communities around the world, we are providing workforce reports so that those communities can understand their local skills gap. And a lot of times when someone talks about data philanthropy or giving away data, one concern is, well, wait a second, isn't that a business advantage? Isn't that a proprietary advantage that I have? And why would I just give that away? But when I think about that LinkedIn example, which I've been involved in, I see that as not competing with LinkedIn's business. It's actually ramping it up because you're getting more people to think about what other data LinkedIn might have, to think about if I become a customer, if I sign up for a certain type of account, I'll actually have the ability to do even more. So giving out some fundamental, I don't want to use the word basic, but it's foundational data. So it's foundational data, giving that to policymakers, giving that to communities, so they can get insights they never had before, and then say, and by the way, we can help you build on that even more if you want to work with us over time.
Right, and I think, a lot of this does go back to basics. So, even what you were speaking about, Mallory, as far as data cleanup, that's huge. Assisting a nonprofit with, making some sense of the data that they're collecting can be so meaningful. And, they might not have staff to do it. So I want to ask you, Jake, you work with a lot of nonprofits, and what are the biggest challenges you see? You, as Mallory mentioned, pair professionals, data professionals with nonprofits or around the world. So are there trends? Are there things that, many challenges they have in common?
Yeah, great question. So just as a little context, I don't expect people to know DataKind. Basically, as mentioned, we match people from industry who want to go work on social problems with nonprofits. It's like Doctors Without Borders for data geeks. And so we do it all over the world. And the thing that's interesting about it is a lot of times we're basically playing like, we think of ourselves as a weaver of worlds, right? So we're kind of like, or switchboard operator, a little less glamorously. So you'll have someone come and raise their hand and say, hey, I'm a Deloitte person, I want to come help on a project. Amnesty International say, well, we want help, but they can't necessarily articulate their data problem. You end up going off to other companies to say, well, Amnesty International is interested in understanding how refugees are moving, so we got to find satellite imagery or who's got that data. So in a lot of ways, just to explain sort of our role in this, we kind of see ourselves as this kind of matchmaker and relationship counselor, finding all these things. So I will plus one what the resources I think that everyone just mentioned, right? So corporations can give people, money, software, data, broadly speaking. I think they've all kind of been covered. There's probably more things too, but those are the big things. But I think the biggest trend that we're seeing is folks trying to, or a need for someone to help kind of translate between what that data is that's available and how it can be used and what the problem is. Because again, if you've got, I won't use Amnesty International, I'll use a project that John and I worked on where we were working to help the Vision Zero program, which is a program to get pedestrian deaths down to zero across cities. And so it was a multi-city effort. We brought in a bunch of data scientists in New York and Seattle, and we got government data. We also tried to get some corporate data from Uber and Lyft and others to say, if we could understand where cars were and what the kind of traffic flows were, we could estimate what was going on the ground better. And what was interesting, though, is that the cities had kind of conceived of using data for Vision Zero to say, we're just going to get a big count of how many people are getting killed, and then we're going to just make policy changes, right? There wasn't a sense of what are the algorithmic sense of this. And then Uber's sitting on top of all the location data, but there wasn't necessarily someone to say, well, this is how this could be applied to traffic flow estimation for this problem. Or maybe they did know that, I don't want to assume they didn't, but hadn't been matched up to these cities. And then of course you've got the consultants or data scientists volunteering who don't necessarily know these things either. So I think what's really, I kind of spell that out to say that I think maybe the next step beyond saying, hey, I want to do this, is thinking about how to build those partnerships to do this. As mentioned, of course, we help facilitate that, but I've seen a lot of companies like SAS and IBM and others building those relationships and really saying, not just saying, hey, here's all my stuff, like I'm just gonna put it out there and like have at it, that'll be good, but actually saying, spending the time up front to say, who are my partners, what do they need? Like, do they need my staff, or do they only need a few people? Because if so, maybe this isn't the best avenue for my employee retention program, because I can only actually put 2 people on it, or is it the data? So that's a really long way around of saying, I think when it really comes to making change, if you're trying to make a big difference, think about putting in that upfront investment time and figure out who are your partners and what do they need, so you can do that kind of demand-supply matching.
Jay, can I ask you a question? So
Yeah.
having worked on that Vision Zero project and lots of other projects in your role as founder of DataKind, obviously there are lots of times that government open data is used. So Vision Zero being one example.
Yeah.
So New York, Seattle, New Orleans, we're working with government open data. To what extent do businesses understand where the gaps and the holes are that they can fill in? Because if you're a business, what's the point of going to a bunch of trouble if you're simply replicating, duplicating data sets that are pretty much out there already from government open data? So has that landscape analysis been done? Do the private sector companies that you work with understand where the holes are?
Great question.
Is there any coordination going on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so I'm going to throw this over to Mallory in a second to see if you know as well. I haven't seen that done yet, but I may have just missed it. The latest thing in my feed the last couple of days was Google's Dataset search engine. So there's you can see people making strides towards trying to collate where this data is out there. But no, I would actually say if there was any meta need across the space for almost everything, it would be coordination. It would basically be fixing these market dynamics. Government puts out, I don't think government knows what to put out. Government's like, I can put out what I have, but there's no algorithmists on the other side, like building predictive algorithms, or few, building predictive algorithms for social change. There's no feedback loop on what's needed. Most companies come asking, what can I do with my data? What problems can this match to? And that's already a gap. So no, I don't think there's a good landscape. So if anyone out there has done that or knows of people doing it, that would be very helpful, I think. I don't know, Mallory, have you seen this?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question, and it's always the case, even within the scope of your own business. How can you use what you have to make the most of it or fill in with other data sets that could be interesting? So having that global vision is really difficult, but really important. An example that I think we could highlight that's showing progress in this space is actually on the UN side. The Office for Humanitarian Coordination has opened up a new humanitarian data center, and they've opened up, I think, just earlier this year, and that's, I don't know if they're still in the building phase, but that's meant to be their role. So coordinating and understanding what data is out there in the space of responding to humanitarian events and disasters. So taking the time to invest in centralized mechanisms to have a scope of the landscape is important.
You asked the question, John. I imagine you have a thought about
Kick
this.
it back to you.
The leading question.
Sure. So one of the things that made me think about this was we built a pretty simple tool called Civic Graph to map the landscape of who's doing what in civic tech, who's using technology for social good, how do they relate to one another, what kinds of projects they're working on together, so to understand those relationships, and it's a crowdsourced knowledge base. And so one of the relationships that exists between the nodes in this network is data. And so data philanthropy, data use, any kind of data sharing. And there are very few on the map. A lot of funding relationships, a lot of collaboration, not a lot of data relationships. And so previously I worked in government, and we had a big focus on putting the data out there. Put it out there, build it, and they will come. And so certain data sets are used a lot, as we all know, weather data, GPS, et cetera. But the question is, one, it would be useful for government agencies that are opening up data and spending money and resources on this to understand how their data is being used. But then it would be really useful for the private sector, the people in this room, as they're thinking about data philanthropy, as they're thinking about how they should be sharing data with other organizations, frankly, be it customers or nonprofits, whatever it might be, it'd be really interesting to understand what's already out there, because we all want to use our time effectively. We don't want to waste our time and energy. If we're going to do a project about opening up data, we want to make sure it's the one that's going to have the biggest bang, and it's really going to fill a gap that's not already filled.
Nice.
And that goes back to being strategic, thinking about what you're good at, where the gaps exist at the nonprofit, and bringing those things together. But do you think that there is a shift too, maybe because of the emergence of more privacy concerns around data sharing? Is that something that's come up, or companies I know maybe a little more wary of sharing too much data and sharing it in the right way?
I think it's a totally fair point. So GDPR went into effect on May 25th, as we all know, because we got all those notifications from every single service we've signed up for ever in our lives. And so at Microsoft, we obviously do business everywhere, including Europe. We made a choice to apply GDPR protections everywhere, even in markets where we're not legally required to. And I think you're right. There's very much, I mean, literally there are laws and regulations going into place, but there's also just a mindset that I don't think was present 5 or 10 years ago, 5 years ago, say, where people are very, very aware of not just privacy, but also ethics.
Right.
So it's not just what can we do, what are we legally allowed to do, it's what should we be doing. And so trying to really think twice. You know, there's the old saying, not that old, I guess, 10-year-old saying of move fast and break things. And these days, somebody made some stickers and they say, move purposefully and fix things. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I think a lot of businesses right now are trying to move purposefully to not make mistakes, because mistakes can be really damaging, not just to your business, but also to the people impacted by that mistake. So we're trying to move purposefully and fix things.
Right. I know, Mallory, you know a lot about data ethics and you've done some work in this. So, you know, what are your thoughts on where we are, what more needs to be done? Should there be more education when data scientists are going through their training?
Sure. I mean, it's a topic that's getting more and more important, especially as we start to see that algorithms can be a black box, and we have to be really, really cognizant that we're responsible in engineering solutions to problems that balance the right types of considerations. I think it's an open question, one that the data science community is actively trying to solve. And I'll just do a plug for this weekend, actually, is the Bloomberg Data for Good Exchange. It's this Sunday, posted here in the space. And the reason that I bring that up is actually there's going to be a panel and a new toolbox that's being unveiled for data scientists to, as you're going through a project, going down the checklist to make sure that your project and what you're working on meets a code of ethics. We still have a long way to go as a community, but trying to get towards something like a Hippocratic oath of data science. So.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of work around that, but like I said, more work to be done. And as you can imagine, data scientists have a lot of opinions, and we factored all of that in, and a lot of good things coming out of that effort that will be great as we share with cities and government professionals who are attending on Sunday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
Jake, what other?
cases come to me.
Yeah,
on the
thoughts do you
privacy
have?
side of things. I mean, look, let's not ignore it. Every good story about like using data for a philanthropic end is this happy story of a company putting its data to good use, and you know, refugees being saved and houses being built. But it's like, it's so not that easy, right? I saw a screaming match once between a nonprofit and a social media company, where the nonprofit was like, you have all our data, that's our data. If you release that, the world would be changed. And the social media company was like, if I released all this data, everyone's data would be public. Like, I promise you don't want that, right? And so I think, again, there's privacy like challenges on both sides, right? Like, this is truly not a black and white issue that like, yeah, it should all just be opened in some way. So I think what's interesting is on the human side, I mean, +1 to everything again. The thing we're seeing are people trying to play that brokerage role. So GovLab here in New York is starting to explore data stewards and data collaboratives. I think this is meant to be an extension beyond what I think exists today, where some companies will allow academic researchers to have access to data for certain projects. This, I think, is meant to be a little more general, to say, what could your data do? How could we share it, you know, privately just for this purpose? So there's a really kind of clear, transparent process that doesn't also just mean you have to kind of open your doors wide. The other that we were talking about a little bit backstage is like, some people are trying to solve this technologically. So some folks are playing around with differential privacy. I don't know if people have seen here, but it's actually a kind of a cryptographic method where, let's say you want to share a bunch of people's location data, you inject enough randomness into it in a certain way so that if you're trying to make a conclusion, like where did people go and how many people went there, you still get the same answer in the aggregate. But if you actually drill down to the individual level, it's not actually identifiable as the original person. It's interesting math stuff. I don't know how many people care about it mathily, but the point is you can kind of release data in a way where you get the same aggregate effect, but the individual can't be traced back. So I don't know, there's some of the cool things I think we're seeing, data collaboratives and some cool tech techniques.